Hey guys, how is everyone doing today? Hope everyone got a great night's sleep. Shout out to everyone in the chat. This is pretty early. I know. I didn't expect to go live either. Usually that's how it happens. You don't usually expect to go live, it just happens. Uh, but the Gabby Petito report is hot off the presses, and we've covered the Gabby Petito here. Specifically, one thing that we covered here, and that I really pride myself in this because it's an area that number one I really like to look at, and number two, I'm just like, this review for the city of Moab, for the complaints that were filed on the Moab City Police Department, this independent review, okay, really hit exactly what we were talking about several months ago. And so when that video, the body cam video was leaked, and we talked about it in this channel, if you guys remember, we did like 2 or 3 lives on that specific, and then the case kind of took a life of its own, right? Because they were still looking for Gabby, and then they found Gabby, and then they were looking for, excuse me, Brian, and then Brian has been found. You had Dog the Bounty Hunter that kind of came out of, I don't know, nowhere. Trying to help in a situation, okay? And so there was just different moving parts to this case. Um, you had the behavior of the family, Brian's family, that was very questionable. A lot of people were bringing light to the situation, and there's still a lot of conspiracy behind Brian, behind the family, behind Brian's death, behind the way in which the body was found, the manner of death. There's just so much controversy to that. But where my mind was at is this independent report, because I wanted to find out whether the Moab police, okay, whether they were at fault. What failure happened here? So this report is hot off the presses. I wanted to come in here and talk about it with you guys because it really does bring a good conversation about how we see domestic violence, how we respond to it, okay? And not only that, but in rural counties, in rural areas, where a lot of it, they're not in, let's say, maybe as overt or as public as we'd like to see it, but it's out there. We just want to make sure that we shed some light to it. So if you guys remember a couple of months back, I had said this department needs some training. They needed something, okay? And we got the report. We're gonna look into it. And the initial opening statement, and shout out to everyone in the chat if I have not greeted you. We got some bots. I'm just noticing the surge of bots. Let me go ahead and remove some of these bots. I don't have a mod here yet, and that's okay. Shout out to everyone in the chat. Let's see. Let me just greet some people before I start. I have JC, Barbie, Larissa's here. Marie O, Quiet Bitch One is here. Shout out to you. Coco Renee is here. Unapologetic Goddess is here. Shout out to you. Dukes is here. Barbie's here. Of course, our members are here. We have 3 or 4 members in our chat. I'm noticing some bots. Someone by the name of Mindy, who Mindy the bot is here. A lot of us are noticing some bots as far as the content creators go. So we're going to review this report, okay? I wanted to wait and get some people in here as well. Maybe we can give them like 30 seconds to make it in here because, yeah, warning, somebody dropped the ball. You're not seeing Mindy because I actually blocked Mindy. Let me do a little 30-second clip, give people some time to get in here because the report is very lengthy. It's about 102 pages. We're not going to go through everything. The biggest statement is really the front page, but wanted to have a conversation with you guys about it because if you followed us with the story, specifically to the failures of domestic violence and how they were reviewed, you already know that this was a huge thing. So let's give these people, I don't know, maybe 30 seconds. Let's see if we can do a 30-second little clip. And here we go. Alrighty. We're back. That should have given people some time. Yes. Okay, if you're here, you're here, and if you're not, you're not. Um, let me see. Let me put this down. Make sure we can zoom into this document real quick. Yes, please hit that thumbs up, everyone. Let's see. The initial statement, opening statement from the Moab police basically says that after a formal complaint was filed to the Moab City Police Department, an independent law enforcement agency has completed a thorough review of the August 12th, 2021 DV incident involving Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie. The independent agency investigative reports finds that the officers, who responded to the incident made several unintentional mistakes that stem from the fact that officers failed to cite Miss Petito for domestic violence. The city acknowledges that this finding may raise questions, and the issue is examined extensively in the investigative report. And that, my friends, it really is. I'll give you that. Going to the next paragraph, the report recommends improvements to both the polices and the training of the Moab City Police Department. These recommendations include providing additional training in domestic violence investigation, as well as additional, legal training to ensure officers understand state laws and statutes, conducting an overall policy review, conducting a software review, and strengthening the review process for incident reports. The investigative report also finds that a statement was never obtained from the original 911 caller, and that the recommended and recommends that be done to make the incident report more complete. The city intends to implement the report's recommendations. Based on the report's findings, the city of Moab believes our officers showed kindness, respect, and empathy in their handling of this incident. As the Moab City Police Department continues its daily mission to serve our community, efforts are underway to provide additional resources and tools to assist the addressing domestic violence incident. Plans are in place to added a trained domestic violence specialist to oversee incidents investigated by Moab officers. We have also added an ongoing training and testing to ensure that the officers understand policies and procedures. The city of Moab sends our sincerest condolences to the Petito family. Our heart goes out to them as they continue to deal with the tragic loss of their daughter. Oh, Barbie. Unintentional. Okay. Now, this paragraph, let's see, the third paragraph, okay? Third paragraph. These recommendations include providing additional training in domestic violence investigation. Okay, sounds like that's what needs to happen. Pretty basic, it needs to happen. As well as additional legal training to ensure officers understand state laws and statutes. That's where I want to stop. Because if in the body cam, one thing that we saw the officer going from one officer to the other officer with the little book, okay, trying to read the statutes, trying to recommend, trying to decide, am I going to arrest her or not? Who hit who? When did it happen? Putting all these details together. And there was, I believe, from what I saw body cam wise, there's like 3 or 4 officers present, one of which was a female as well. And not that that matters, but there was a couple officers. So the 3 or 4 officers that were present did not have a good comprehension as far as state laws and statutes. Policy reviews. Conducting a software review. Strengthening the review, and let's see, review of process for incident reports. The investigative report also finds that a statement was never obtained from the original 911 caller. Now, do you guys remember the 911 caller? We're like, well, the 911 caller said that he slapped the girl. But the statement said something different. Which one is it? So many moving parts to this case when the stop happened. Too many moving parts. Too many things. Several officers, and it was, I guess, unintentional, an error. Shit happens. Hmm. What do you guys think on the chat? And that's just that paragraph alone. I said, oh, I don't know if I would have written that way. That's just my opinion, though, because I feel like, um, I don't know. It takes away from what's going on. Now I'm still in shock that considering how distraught Gabby was, they didn't do more in that time. That is messed up. I mean, there's more. Oh, there's more. And there's more. Let me see if I can zoom out of here real quick because, like I said, it's a very intense report. There should have been more table of contents. It gives us a synopsis. We read a little bit of the synopsis. Number 43, we're going to go to their conclusions as well. Okay. There was formal complaints from the attorney Tanya Reeves, the family attorney. Okay. They gave us an introduction as far as who and what parties were involved, what time, a very well written report. Okay. However, there's a disclaimer. Okay. That they reviewed body worn camera footage and interviewed Assistant Chief Palmer, Pratt, and Officer Robbins. So 3 officers were interviewed. They were recorded using audio recording devices. The interviews with Pratt, Robbins were done following the assurance of the statements of rights, the Garrity Statement of Rights. Okay. So let's see. While watching the videos and while listening to the audio interviews, I typed notes as it related to each recording. During these notes, there were times where I attempted to transcribe the interactions, questions, and answers. The notes should in no way be considered an exact transcription of the recordings as they are likely not accurate and they lack appropriate grammar, spelling into the way the words were actually said compared to how they were written. Okay. The notes were made specifically to allow myself a way to review what I observed more easily rather than trying to review these recordings more times than absolutely necessary. Okay. Okay. Well, I mean, I guess that's a method. I'm not really sure. On a part time basis, I have spent months reviewing this case and have been provided the luxury of being able to pause, rewind, fast forward, take notes, etc. This luxury is not afforded in the grand majority of police investigations. Well, now, but here's the deal: you have the FBI involved. Okay, you had too many people involved, so I would hope that you would be offered the grand everything at this point because all the resources were put into this case while there was other cases and things that needed attention as well, right? During that time. So I would hope that the luxury of being able to actually take the time on this report and investigate and do an internal review would be there. Period. That's my thought on that. But anyways, there was many what ifs that were presented itself as part of the investigation. The primary one being, would Gabby be alive today if this case was handled differently? Chat, members, subscribers, mods, people. I want to know, in your opinion, you could put a yes, a no. Would she still be alive today if this was handled differently? If she was arrested, ooh, excuse me, my alarm is going off. If she was apprehended for the domestic violence, would she still be alive today? Yes, no? Go ahead and put it on the chat. Do you guys think that she would still be alive today? That's the question that we all wanted to know, right? That the audience wanted to know. Would this have been fixed? Would the family be aware and then they can come and pick her up after traveling months in a van? Clearly was not a good situation. Clearly there was a history. Clearly they weren't very open to what was going on. Barbie's saying very possible. Get her completely removed from him. I mean, that in itself could very well have been an issue, right? I think so, Coco Renee says. I mean, I think so too. Big possibility. Anybody else have a different perspective? Please put it on the chat. If you feel like no, everything would have been fine. She would have gone back to him. I don't know because if it was a domestic violence kind of cycle, there's a cycle, right? The victim, okay, tends to repeat itself over and over. Usually, it's when the victim tries to leave that things kind of get a little bit too much and it becomes dangerous. There's a time frame. There's been studies done over this, okay? Duke says, I believe so. Okay. Okay. All right. That's the biggest question. And this reviewer says, that is an impossible question to answer despite it being the answer many people want to know. Correct. Correct, right? Nobody knows and no one will ever know the answer to that question. My job is to provide information into the details of this investigation and if it was handled appropriately. You know what? That's correct. That's absolutely correct. We have somebody that says DMA. No, he would just have done it in another time. They would have broken up and gotten back together. It was a toxic relationship, right? Well, that's that cycle that we were talking about. So you're saying that even if she was apprehended, they would have returned to each other and it would have likely happened some other time. I mean, it's a hard thing to predict, right? Hard thing to predict. Yeah, Larissa, I would have to agree. I would have to agree with your comment there. Something to marinate and sit on, and I'm kind of glad that they wrote this in the report because that is really the $1 million question. Okay. What was it? The initial call, and we talked about the initial call. We're just going to go right to it. On August 12th, 2021, okay, at about 16:39, 16 hours, the Grant County Dispatch Center received a call from blank, who was calling to report what he described as a domestic dispute. Blank reports that he was driving and saw a gentleman slapping the girl. The slapping of the girl. Okay. Stated he stopped driving and the male and the female ran up down the sidewalk where he proceeded to hit her. Stated they hopped in the van and drove off. Said he took a picture of the license to describe the vehicle and the license plates information, further describing the make, model, and other characteristics of the van. That's the call that we all heard. We played it in our channel on the past. Okay? He said he slapped her. And so that's what made America, YouTubers, newscasters, like, what the hell is going on? Let's go back and repeat this shit again because we need to hear it one more time. Let's go hear it again. So somebody who made the call saw him slapping a girl. The dispatch action used the emergency tone and alerts of all law enforcement working in the area of the call they just received. Dispatch states they had a report of a male hitting a female and the van left northbound from Moonflower Community Co-op. Dispatch further provided a description of the vehicle to law enforcement. Okay, great. So Officer Pratt arrives on the scene at Moonflower Community Co-op, where the incident took place, and asks the dispatcher for the reporting party's phone number. Officer Pratt also tells dispatch he spoke to another witness who gave more details on the vehicle that left. Based on Officer Pratt's report, the witness Officer Pratt is referring to is blank. So the traffic stop happens. Officer Robbins stops the vehicle on the turnoff road that goes into the national park after he observes the van cross over the double yellow lines and cross back over and hits the curb on the passenger side. That was another red flag right there. Why did he hit the curve? Why? If it's just a stop, it's just a stop. I've been pulled over a couple times. Do I go crazy hitting the curve? No. I mean, to me, that would have been a red flag. I would have been very concerned. Maybe the officer thought, well, maybe he was startled. Maybe it's, you know, giving some grace to the driver. I'm not really sure. Officer Robbins reports to dispatch that the driver may be intoxicated after observing the driving pattern. Robbins stops the vehicle and has the female exit the vehicle, separating the male driver and the female passenger. From this point forward, the male and female, Brian and Gabby, never speak to each other again while officer is in contact. Huh. And then we get into Landry's statement. And JC says he was leaning towards her. There you go. Did the officer see this? That would have been a great question to ask in this report. Did the officer see him leaning forward? Yes, no, I don't know. What did the officer observe? Because if he said it appears that he's intoxicated, well, I mean, what can you see from the van? Were the windows tinted? Are you able to see? Sometimes you can see through a um what is it? The windows, right? When somebody's driving or they're dancing or jamming the music or whatever, you could actually see stuff like that. So I'm just kind of curious to know, well, what did the officer see? I don't know. If he said he was intoxicated because of the way that he was driving, maybe that would have been a red flag, right? That's the biggest red flag for me. So Brian says, and he stated that he and Gabby had not been drinking. He said it's been a long day. Brian stated that their little squabble started earlier in the day when they were at the coffee shop. Brian stated that they have been there for so long, from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Brian stated the flies had been intense and that the flies have definitely been getting to her. Okay. Huh. Brian stated that they got back to the van where there was some little dirt at the back of the van. Brian stated that they moved their food around and there was a little disagreement there. When he asked about the disagreement, Brian stated it wasn't much of a disagreement, but went on to say that he had dirty feet and said there was little things, relationship things they were arguing about. Okay. Brian stated Gabby was working on his website blog and said he gave her time. And I quote, Brian stated they had a nice morning, but Gabby got worked up and they were trying to get with their day. Brian said he tried to distance himself from Gabby by locking up the van and walking away. Brian said that while doing this, he suggested to Gabby they both take a breather. Brian said he felt like he was the only way, only he felt. Brian said he felt that was the only way for them to calm down, but Gabby was getting worked up. Okay. Brian said Gabby had her phone and was trying to get the keys from him, and this is when he was pushing her away. Brian said he knew he shouldn't push her, but stated he was just trying to push her away, stating that they needed to take a minute, step back, and breathe. Brian said he had the keys because he didn't want Gabby to go anywhere, as he didn't have his phone, and added he didn't really have a phone and was worried about her leaving without him. Oh, shoot. And him being alone. Later on, Brian would provide Officer Robbins his phone number and confirm the number by looking at his cell phone. This was interesting considering he had previously that this was interesting considering he said previously that he didn't have a phone. Huh? Do you guys see that? Yeah, so did he have a phone? Did he not have a phone? I guess he did. Well, that answers it, right? Even the person writing this report is saying, well, this is interesting considering that he didn't have a phone. I guess he did have a phone. He was worried about being left behind. She was going to drive away. with the van and the items? I don't know. Brian said things weren't physical. Before the point, Brian said, let's just take a breather, stating he was locking up the van. They should each go for a walk. Brian said it was at that time Gabby was trying to get the keys from him, where he demonstrated pushing her away and said that is, and I quote, when she hit me. Hmm. Brian said he didn't get really physical, but stated he was just trying to push Gabby away and not get hit. Brian said this was when he got really loud and stated that was probably what drew everybody's attention. Okay. Brian said he was yelling, back up, get away. Brian said he was trying to make her calm down and pointed to Gabby that everybody's watching. So I'm thinking in my head, watching the situation, right? Everybody's watching. Coco Renee, I would have to agree with that. And I would definitely have to agree with that too, Larissa, is that he was taunting her and that he was antagonizing. I mean, he does sound a little antagonizing to me, right? But then again, this is Brian giving this statement to the officer, and the officer capturing this. Now it's in a review. So I'm sure that there's probably maybe things in between that we will never really know, right? Hmm. Brian said the injury near his eye was from Gabby's phone. Brian said Gabby had jumped on him and was swinging when he pushed her. Brian stated Gabby also wore rings, and the combination of the phone, her rings, and her nails were what caused the injuries. Okay. There was a park ranger points out scratches on the left cheeks of Brian, on the left side of Brian's neck, left side of his nose, the scratch near the center of his face, and bruise and bleeding on the side of his head. Ah, see, and all those little details weren't something that we saw in the video. So that's a good thing to kind of keep in mind. Officer Robbins finds an additional injury on Brian's right bicep tricep area. Brian said he was not in any pain and that he wasn't complaining. Okay. When asked about medication, Brian said he doesn't take any medication, but said Gabby told him in the past to take Xanax because of his high anxiety. Oh, okay. Well, that's an interesting point of view. Okay. You're telling the officer that your partner told you to take Xanax because of your high anxiety? When asked if Gabby takes medication, he replies, well, chuckling and smirking. She's crazy. She's just crazy. Brian then immediately takes back the comment by saying he's kidding. Hmm. Okay. In regards to the driving behavior, Brian said he hit the curb because Gabby grabbed and turned the wheel. Brian said Gabby told him, I can't believe we're getting pulled over. When she grabbed the wheel, when asked about his speed, Brian stated it was probably from the adrenaline of getting pulled over and Gabby grabbing the wheel, further stating that he's still shaken up from everything that just happened. Brian apologized multiple times for his driving, stating if he was driving too fast before getting pulled over, he was sorry. Brian said they were headed to the park to get water. One thing that stood out to me, and it still, I don't know why this stands out to me. Okay, when I watched the body cam footage, Brian was offered water bottles. And he said, I don't know why this is, I have to share it with you guys. It's in my head right now. Man, it's like a flash memory that I'm getting right now as I'm thinking about this. See, the officer, I remember the officer asked him, does he want a water bottle? And he said something to the effect of he doesn't drink water from water bottles. I don't know why that stood out to me the most. I don't know why, guys, but I have a photographic memory of that body cam and when he said that. And I'm trying to figure out, and I've been trying, and this was back in August. So I'm trying to figure out why that plays in my head a couple times. Because then Brian said in this report that they're heading to the park to get water. Officer offered him a water bottle. He said he doesn't drink water from water bottles. And you could see how hot it was that day, too. Anyways, let's get back to Gabby Petito's statements. If you guys ever have that happen to you, I'm curious to know where you have like a flash memory of a conversation. You might have not necessarily been part of it, or maybe it was a movie and there's a specific thing that kind of holds in your head for whatever reason. It's stayed in your head. I'm trying to figure out why that is, but it's been in my head for quite some time. So Gabby Petito's statements to law enforcement says while still in the vehicle, Gabby is asked why she was crying. Gabby stated that they had been fighting this morning, stated that they've been stating there have been quote unquote personal issues. Gabby states, I was distracted. I was distracting him for driving. I'm sorry. This statement right here was very disturbing to me. I was distracting him from driving. I'm sorry. Once separated, Gabby said that she had been having a very stressful morning, later confirming that they have not been drinking and that they did not drink. Okay. Gabby said she was just trying to get back, trying to get work done, and was apologizing to Brian after she had thrown a bunch of stuff in the back of the van. Okay. Gabby said Gabby said she gets so stressed out and and has OCD. Gabby further stated she has a mean attitude, but was not trying to get to be mean about straightening things up. Gabby said she was apologizing, but said it in a mean tone. Okay. And Brian got frustrated with her and locked her out of the van and told her to go take a breather. Gabby said she wanted to get going and said they were out of water and they were going to the park to refill with water. Hmm. Okay. What is an apology under a mean tone? I mean, I could see, I'm sorry, then it sounds like you don't really mean it because you're still upset. The communication piece was pretty big for me. That's what I noticed. Gabby states she's trying to start a blog and is building her website and had been stressed out about it. Gabby stated that she had so much work that she was doing on her computer, and Brian said doesn't really believe that she can do any of it, which was upsetting to her. Gabby states they had been fighting all morning and Brian wouldn't let her in the van before. When he asked why Brian wouldn't let her in the van, Gabby said Brian told her she needed to calm down. Okay. Gabby said she is perfectly calm and states Brian really stresses her out and said it had been a rough morning. Gabby said Brian walked away to take a breather, but she didn't want to. Gabby says she wanted to sit in the van because all of her stuff is in there. Gabby stated that she'd been working in the van and that is where she wanted to be. Gabby said Brian told her to relax, but she didn't want to, so she got really mad. Gabby was asked about the injuries. Right there. Gabby was asked about the injuries. This sentence right here kind of really triggers me because then I said, all right, so there were injuries. People were disputing about whether she had injuries, didn't have injuries, were no injuries. There was just so much going on. And they were looking at this body cam to determine that. But Gabby was asked about the injuries on her left cheek and arm. Gabby initially says she wasn't sure what caused it. Stating the incident happened really fast. Gabby said she was just trying to get back in the van and said that Brian's backpack was what got her. Gabby was told about witnesses that reported Brian had hit her. Gabby responded, "To be honest, I definitely hit him first." Ugh. To be honest, I definitely hit him first. So they had hit each other, but she had hit him first. She doesn't say, "I didn't hit him." She doesn't say any of that. She says, "I definitely hit him first." Gabby said she had slapped Brian a couple times and Brian kept telling her to shut up. And Gabby says she hit Brian as I was trying to get him to stop telling me to calm down. Gabby said Brian reacted by reaching her arm so I wouldn't slap him. Officer Pratt asked if Brian only grabbed her and she said, "Yeah." Officer Pratt then asked, "Did he hit you though?" Gabby replied by saying, "I guess, but I hit him first, twice." She said I hit him first. The whole issue here is, guys, is should she have been cited for domestic violence? She's telling you, "I hit him first." Self-admitting, "I hit him first." There's injuries to Gabby at this point. And him. Gabby stated Brian grabbed my face, I guess, while also demonstrating the action. Gabby stated like he didn't punch me in the face. Gabby said Brian grabbed her face and said she could feel a cut on her left cheek. Gabby stated when she touches it, it burns. When asked about the van hitting into the curb, Gabby said, "I hit him." Again, another self admitting, "I hit him," and stated that was the reason Brian hit the curb. Gabby stated she was hitting Brian while he was driving, but not a lot. But yeah, Gabby said it didn't last long and said she saw the police car behind them and demonstrated throwing a punch. Gabby said it was when she saw the police lights that she hit Brian and said, "You're stupid. You're an idiot." And I think and I remember very clearly in that body cam footage when she actually reenacted that by hitting her I think it was her fist, saying that she had hit him in the shoulder. You're stupid, you're an idiot, after they had been pulled over. Gabby said she did not touch the steering wheel, but only for like a second. I just saw the lights come on. Gabby demonstrated, remember I told you guys this is this photographic memory that I have on this scene. Demonstrated the punch she did to Brian while stating, "You're an idiot." Gabby was asked again if she ever touched the steering wheel, and Gabby said, "No, no, I didn't touch the steering wheel at all." Yeah, JC, here you go. That's what I was talking about when leaning forward. This case was mind boggling. I would have to agree. That's the statement. Gabby was asked if she takes any medication and states she didn't. Gabby says she does yoga as a coping mechanism and states that she has high anxiety for and OCD. When asked if Brian is a patient is patient with her, Gabby said, "Yeah, but I get it just makes me upset. I know he definitely gets frustrated with me a lot because I have a lot of anxiety and he definitely has anxiety too." Okay. Then we have another witness statement. All right. In this one, this is a written and a verbal statement. Officer Pratt calls one of the witnesses via phone, cell phone. Also provides a sworn written statement later on and states that he had observed Gabby and Brian involved in a dispute, stated that from what he could tell, it appeared that at one point they may have been fighting over a phone and thought it may have been Gabby's phone. Blank reported Brian was trying to keep Gabby from getting into the van. Blank said Brian was sitting in the driver's seat while Gabby was trying to get into the van through the driver's side door and said Gabby hit him a few times in the arm and in and or face while trying to get into the vehicle. And said Gabby forced her way over Brian's lap via the driver's side door and got into the passenger seat. Blank heard Gabby tell Brian, "Why do you have to be so mean?" And stated he wasn't sure if it was play fighting, stated Gabby's punches were like sludges to the face, but Blank felt something was off. He said he had a weird vibe, stated that he wasn't sure how serious the incident was. But to him, it seemed like Brian was trying to leave Gabby and possibly take over the cell phone. Okay? Because remember, earlier he said, I don't have a phone. But then it was confused. Well, does he have a phone? Do we not? The whole thing was very much confusing, right? Officer Pratt asked if Blank ever saw Brian strike Gabby. Blank hesitated in his answers and stated he, quote unquote, maybe saw a punch or a shove, but nothing like a full punch to the face or anything. Officer Pratt asked if Blank could tell if the push or shove was aggressive action or a defense maneuver. Now, I got to stop right here. Why does that matter? Why does it matter? If your question is, well, was it a full, punch in the face? How did that go? Why does it matter if the punch was aggressive or not? The punch was thrown, right? You see, if you're responding to this, does it really matter? Like the punch was thrown, that should have answered the question. Because then you're getting to the point of, well, was he aggressive? If he wasn't aggressive, then maybe he didn't mean it. Maybe she didn't mean it. And that's where you get into semantics. And that's not the point. Whoever the hell threw the first punch, aggressive or not, clearly this witness is telling you I had a weird feeling about this. It looked weird. Hence why they called it in. Right? He said it wasn't sure, stating it was a good question and wasn't entirely sure what exactly was going on. Blank said it appeared to him that Brian was trying to close off the passenger side of the vehicle and close things up. Blank said Brian put a backpack or something on the back of the vehicle. Blank said Brian was stepping into the vehicle and Gabby was out trying to get in. She said he didn't see anything that was Brian kicking Gabby or hitting Gabby, further stating that the fight was kind of light and they were laughing. Huh. Blank said again that Brian was in the driver's seat and had the driver door open, and Gabby was hitting Brian near the arm or maybe in the face with an open hand and was telling Brian to let her in. Officer Pratt made arrangements to pick up a statement from Blank at a later time, and Blank said he would start writing down what he remembered while it was still fresh on his memory. Blank said he was casually observing the incident and said nothing that something seemed off. Blank's statement was attached to the report. So he was casually, see, this is the contradiction. Casually observing the incident and said again that something seemed off. That's exactly what is said on the earlier statement. This person got a weird vibe, okay? But then in this paragraph right here, there's this minimization of this vibe. They were kind of light. Couldn't tell if the shove was aggressive or if it was a defense maneuver. Wasn't sure. It appeared that they were laughing. They were kind of light. They were laughing. Okay. But if your question is who hit who, then that's all it is. Doesn't matter if they were laughing or play fighting, right? That's just my thought. This is what kind of really upset me about this situation. Okay. So then the action, right? And then we get into page 7, and we're going to kind of skim through some of this because it's a lot. It's intensive. It is available, all right, for everybody to review if you have your own opinions about what's going on. So you have two officers. You got Robbins and Pratt. They're investigating, assisting each other. It is my assumption, and this is from the independent reviewers report, okay, statements. It is my understanding and assumption through watching the body worn camera videos that Officer Pratt is more experienced than Officer Robbins and was taking an active role in guiding Officer Robbins throughout this investigation. At the end of the investigation, when another call came out, Officer Pratt asked Robbins if he, Officer Robbins, could feel more comfortable taking the call that just came out, leaving Officer Pratt to conclude this investigation. Okay. Ultimately, it was decided that Officer Robbins could conclude this case, and Officer Pratt left the scene. Officer Robbins advised Gabby that she was not going to be getting charged with anything, but stated he had to separate her and Brian for the night. Robbins tells Brian the same thing, stating that since Gabby did not intend to hurt him, technically speaking, it does not fit the letter of the code. So he was not charging Gabby with domestic violence assault. Robbins advised them both to not have any contact with each other until the following day and allows Gabby to take custody of the van. Okay, while Brian is taken to a hotel. Okay. He was transported to a hotel. During the investigation, Officer Pratt spoke to Blank, Brian, and Gabby to gather the facts of this case. Robin spoke with Brian and Gabby and took photographs of Brian's injuries and both of their driver's license. And that was that, okay? So in here, it gives us a little bit of summary of evidence, okay? Formal complaints from the attorney, and feel free to go through those. Where I really want to get at, and let me see if I can go back to the table. I think it was page 43. I want to get to the point where the conclusion is at. And so where this statement takes us is in terms of the failure, okay, because it wasn't just, there were several officers that were at the scene when they were both pulled over. And you could definitely see one of the officers running around trying to get, as much information, trying to determine where it falls as far as statute, policy, procedures, and code, okay, and trying to make sense of like, well, who does he charge, okay? And it wasn't just one person, there was several officers there. So the failure is they all couldn't really determine what was going on. They couldn't determine, well, do we arrest? They're very young. I don't want them to have this. But in conclusion to this report, it's really about the failure of somebody should have been cited. There was failures in general. Absolutely. And so much attention went to this case, guys. It talks, baby girls. Does any person of color who goes missing receive the amount of media attention as Gabby does? Hey, Jaylani Day was around the same time. It was around the same time asking a serious question. Hopefully, the privileges extend to Gabby's investigation is extended to the next missing person of color. So disheartening. And this is not to diminish what happened to Gabby and her family. No, you're absolutely right. You guys got to remember, excuse me, that Gabby Petito and Jaylani Day, the attention to the media went directly to Gabby Petito. And then you have Dog the Bounty Hunter in there as well. And it created so much sensationalization in this story. And not to say that they don't deserve it, but it did create a divide with everyone. And it's very concerning that all the resources went to one and not the other. And that's just how it is. So here they list us the Utah State Code, okay, as to what they were using to cite to make their decisions. All right. Let me see if I can go directly. And I think it was page 43 because this is a pretty extensive report. And so what we read earlier was the synopsis, okay, the statements and everything that happened. And so this whole situation was pretty much a huge cluster of he said, she said, what happened, what didn't happen. Let's see, we are now on page, let's see, where are we at? 42 or 43, excuse me. Conclusion. This is kind of, for me, this is the sauce. This is where everything's at. There's not one thing I would like to point out that I believe is applicable to this case as well as many domestic violence cases. There is one thing, excuse me, I misread that I would like to point out that I believe is applicable to this case as well as many other domestic violence cases. Just because Gabby was determined to be the predominant aggressor as it relates to this incident doesn't mean that she was the long-term predominant aggressor in this relationship. Yeah, we kind of figured that, right? Just because one person is the aggressor doesn't mean that she's always the aggressor. One thing that stood out to me about Gabby is she's taking fault in more than one occasion and in that statement. And that to me is a victim. I kind of wonder how long from the time that they were together she was conditioned to take fault for every little thing that has happened in that relationship. And not only that, I also wonder what else, history wise, she's had to take fault for. I love this sentence because I think it's exactly what needs to be said. Oftentimes, in this case of domestic violence, the long-term victim gets to a point emotionally where they defend themselves or act out in such a way where law enforcement is summoned. There have been many times in my career where someone who we know from a past experience to be a long term victim of domestic violence gets arrested for committing an act of domestic violence against their long term abuser. Despite knowing the history of those involved, we have had to make a decision based on the information presented to law enforcement at that time, despite our personal feelings and known history of that relationship. Okay. It's very likely Gabby was a long term victim of domestic violence. Okay. Very likely. Whether that be physical, mentally, and or emotional. Gabby had a job which she left in order to travel the country with Brian. Gabby was trying to start an online career with Brian, didn't support or believe she could accomplish. Brian tried locking Gabby out of the van in the attempt to control her movements. If somebody locks me out of a van, out of my home, out of my property, yes, that is a controlled movement. Somebody takes my phone, my property away from him, and it's not just to say that uh, it didn't happen both sides. Yes, but they've overstepped a boundary in that relationship where they are able to take each other's properties and take it away from each other to control. If he didn't have a phone, and now we're finding out that he did, okay. She takes it away from him. Yeah, that's a control move. It's vice versa, right? Vice versa. It goes both ways. So I do agree that there was a control movement, maybe on behalf of both. Brian said he was trying to make Gabby calm down, and Gabby said she was trying to get Brian to stop telling her to calm down. Control. I don't want to calm down. You need to calm down. Control. In a van. In a van, out of all places, guys. In a van. Someone's trying to make me calm down. I don't want to calm down. That's control. They're trying to control how I feel, especially if I'm worked up. Don't make me calm down. So, so, and it continues. Gabby also said Brian kept telling her to shut up. Based on the information provided, I can only assume that act of Brian grabbing Gabby's face was his attempt to make Gabby calm down or make her shut up. Although the act of grabbing someone's face, like in this case, rarely causes any significant injury, I find the specific acts of grabbing someone's face is extremely personal, violent, and controlling, right? Just because there are many, there may have been signs that Brian was a long-term predominant aggressor. Law enforcement could only act on the information they were provided. True, right? So that's probably the hardest job of a law enforcement. You're pulling somebody over, and you have to work with whatever that scene and event is happening. That's a hard job to do. Shout out to our law enforcement officers. I definitely is not a job I could ever do, and I'm just throwing that out there. Um, Officer Pratt said, we're all doing this with the fact in our mind that we know what happened later. So it's really convoluted and hard to tell you like anything other than what I thought at the time, which was if I missed a big red flag that he was a murderer, then yes, I missed it. If I would have known he was going to murder her, I would have taken a vacation. I would have taken vacation to follow them because I care about people to the point where he was going to murder her. And I would have intervened and citizens arrest him in Wyoming. Exclamation point. I would have taken my own time. I would have missed my family to go do that. I am desperately fucked over that she got killed. I really am. I would have done anything to stop it if I would have known that was coming. This is directly from Officer Pratt. I'm going to tell you this. When I read that, I was like, damn, these officers are going to have to live with this for the rest of their life. Damn, damn. When speaking with Officer Pratt, I asked him if there was anything else that he thinks I should know or add as it relates to this investigation. Officer Pratt said he accepts responsibility for anything that was found he did wrong in this case. Officer Pratt said, I accept responsibility for it, but I don't want anyone to think that I did not care. I have daughters, and I do want anyone involved to know that I talked to Gabby and I treated Gabby as much like I could, fatherly, the way I would want another cop to interact with my daughters, even if he got it wrong. I do care. I'm devastated about it. I cared that day and I still care. I don't think the public gets what that I don't know if they know we care. I don't know if they know. Whew, that's tough. That's tough. JC says, I don't like that statement. I'm sorry, JC. I know. I think it's just so hard to hear. Um, Phew. There's a lot of questions. There's a lot of speculation regarding this incident, and I can't answer the what if questions. There were mistakes made in how this case was handled. If this was handled flawlessly, would it have changed anything? Nobody knows. More and more in law enforcement, perfection is what is being expected. And with that comes officers second guessing themselves and their decisions. After reviewing all the information and speaking with the officers, I'm confident and comfortable in stating that the mistakes that were made were not intentional. The officers did not know what they were doing was wrong at the time and did not make the decision to benefit themselves in any way. They both believed at the time that they were making the right decision based on the totality of the circumstances that were presented. The Moab Police Department, specifically Officer Pratt and Officer Robbins, are responsible for their actions or lack thereof as it pertains to this investigation. However, I find it difficult to assign responsibility to anyone other than the person or persons directly responsible for Gabby's death. Weeks after and several hundred miles away from their August 12th incident in Moab. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Based on my findings in this report, I would recommend at a minimum the following. Both officers placed in on probation, or if they still on probation, the probation be extended. A review of Officer Robbins' FTO program to determine if he needs to complete additional time on field training. Report writing training, at least 8 hours. Domestic violence investigation related training, at least 8 hours. Legal training, in addition to attending legal training to ensure officers understand the Utah state laws and statutes. I would suggest building a stronger relationship with your local prosecutors to where if there are legal questions that the officers are unable to answer, they're able to and feel comfortable with reaching out to additional guidance. Okay, stop right there. I'm gonna stop right here. One thing that needs to be added here is they need an on-call judge right here. Somebody that they can say, you know what, let me call this on-call judge to determine if somebody can be charged. In a rural county, guys, rural county, I should be able to call somebody like right away. Who's the on-call person? Because clearly these officers didn't know what they were doing, how to decipher or determine the law at that time. If they had called an on-call judge who's very well experienced in domestic violence, they would have said, hey, you know what? She needs to get arrested. She needs to be apprehended. There's marks. There's injuries. And that's not on officer. That is on the actual county, the rural county, the area. There needs to be somebody with experience in the legal field that an officer can just call. Right. So I had to stop that right there. I said, because if I'm out in the field, I should be able to call somebody if I don't have an answer. And based on that recommendation, then I know what to make. Sergeant, captain, I don't know, whatever ranking there may be for these officers, but there needs to be somebody, at least a prosecutor somewhere, a judge that would know what call to make if I'm an officer and I've never dealt with domestic violent calls before like this. So, a review of the report approval process previously in place to determine if more checks and balances are needed. A follow-up with blank to obtain his statement regarding of how long it has been and whether or not his statement may be tainted due to the coverage of his case. Oh, a follow-up with blank to obtain his statement, regardless of how long it has been and whether or not his statement may be tainted due to his coverage of his case. I wonder if that's a blogger right there that they're referencing. Could be. A review of the software used to transfer files to reduce the risk of photographic evidence being lost in the future. Overall policy review. Overall policy review. Updating applicable policy sections to require photographs of injuries be taken of all those involved and require asking medical assistance to all those involved, regardless if they are suspect or victims. Implement a what is it? Lethality assessment protocol and policy in all domestic violent cases. I think the part that I struggle with here is this assessment protocol is where is the assessment to determine whether this is a domestic violence case, right? Where's the assessment for that? Yes, it talks, baby girl. I love this. A lot of rural counties do not have on-call judges or magistrates. You actually call the DA first, okay, and provide them the information, who then puts together a reason for a warrant. Thank you. Thank you for clearing that up. Right. So then I'm thinking, why didn't they have like an on-call DA? Right? Because these officers should be working with their DA, correct? Maybe there's no relationship. I don't know. Um, you witnessed the car swerving, hitting the curb, and noticeable injuries. Obviously, they were fighting and you wasn't concerned. Folks normally get locked up and charged for that, right? Well, that's what I'm thinking. You hit the curve, right? Yeah, the process is not fast in urban locations, rural locations. So again, you need to vote in your midterm elections. Yes, I would agree. Madam with the mess, welcome to the chat. Okay. I need to know what domestic violent cases, what assessments they have, what did they have in place, okay? Um, because what this is telling me right here, I mean, you have your assessment protocols, but I don't think they had an assessment for there to be like in that moment where it would determine or at least advise an officer you're dealing with a domestic violence case. Okay. There's injury, somebody needs to be locked up. Even if throwing out the code for a minute and just looking at what makes sense for that officer, what's easy for them to comprehend at that moment when things are happening. Because like I said, it wasn't just one officer, there were several. There were several. Okay. And then it reviews us the exhibits as far as what they had, the notes. I mean, it's a pretty intense report. I think it's definitely interview notes. A lot is in here. If anybody's interested in reading it and going through it, I just wanted to kind of get to the juice of maybe the highlights of what is going to be talked about or what might make it into the news right away. Um, I think the biggest thing for me is that second and third paragraph that the independent agency investigation report finds that the officers who responded to the incident made several unintentional mistakes that stem from the fact that officers failed to cite Miss Petito for domestic violence. Mm. Mm, 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 mm. That was the biggest thing, and then also the recommendation of training. What do you guys think? I'm kind of curious to know. This is definitely probably not the most happiest subject to talk about. There were some things written in that report that I was like, yes, I definitely agree with that, and no, you're missing this. I would recommend that because it's a very tough subject to pinpoint, and I think that this case, the search of both of them, it took so many resources. It went across states. It took a lot of time and it took attention from other missing people cases. But it brought attention to the fact that we are very specific about what the media puts up there. Okay. What is, what is, what's the word? What is newsworthy? Because at the same time that this Gabby Petito case was happening, and there was like 20 YouTube channels, if not more, covering it, you also had Jelani Day. You also had other people that were missing and did not receive the adequate attention. The media did not give it, and the FBI resources that were so needed, right? So, shout out to everyone in the chat if you hung out with us for the hour to talk a little bit about this very tough subject. Likely one of those subjects that you're like, oh my God, I'm ready to just go have a drink afterwards. Completely understand. I get it. Thank you so much for joining us. Shout out to our new members, our mods, our new subscribers, everyone. I very, 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 very much thank you for your time. I'm going to let you guys go, but wanted to bring that out there because it's about to hit everywhere and wanted to make sure that you guys got a little review of us. If you did not review our past videos on our coverage, and I went specifically to the body cams, not so much to everything else that kind of happened afterwards, because there was just so much coverage to it that I'm like, I didn't want all of our attention there when we've had other cases and other missing persons that also needed some attention. All right, guys, rabbits out.